Welcome back, everybody. We're continuing on with the bow build process, but with that, it kind of got me thinking about, again, the things that we overlook, but the sights we choose, how we set them up, and specifically, this is something that I actually kind of want to do in continuation of a video I did last year where I talked about long-range shooting. So, couple things to refresh. I'm going to have Bo take this bow here and go ahead and draw down range. You got a no fire release on, so it is, I want to go over a couple things. I mentioned before in that video, the measurement, and again, it's a no fire release, so we don't have an arrow, not going to hurt anything. The measurement from your peep sight to your arrow is a direct correlation of what that's going to look like out here in the front of your sight. So in this example, Bo's got a comfortable anchor right there, but you can either let down or raise your anchor up. So I'm going to have him anchor high, what he would be simulated anchoring on his cheekbone. So now this peep is probably above his line of sight, and now this peep measurement is going to shrink because of a higher anchor. Now simulate something that would be a low anchor, like almost rolling underneath your jaw bow. So this is something that's really low. You can see where that peep sight sits on him right now. In this situation, his peep sight would probably be, what, here?
Yep, roughly.
And you can see the difference in elevation, and you can go ahead and let it down, Bo. So there's many parts to this, but as we start breaking this down and understanding the qualities of your own build, your tendencies, I kind of have a tendency to anchor a little bit high. So my peep sight has a tighter measurement than like Bo's does. Bo has a really solid anchor. Bo's got better form than I do. So when he looks, his head straight up, and his peep measurement is probably about, I would say, 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch higher than mine.
Correct.
Right out the gate. Yep. So with that being said, if you look at a direct correlation, let me grab a sight tape here. So if we look at a sight tape that would get printed and mounted on the front of your bow here, in that same situation, if I end up maxing out, because going to get in tight here a little bit, Max. So the measurement we're going to be looking at is the measurement from the bottom of your housing to essentially where your fletching will clear through that bow. So when I look at that measurement, and that's going to dictate what my maximum distance is going to be. When you have a sight setting like Bo's, he's going to automatically have, you know, 15 or 10 to 15 yards further than I would as you look at what the sight tape correlation would be. So that's the first part of it. Understanding if you have a tendency to anchor high like I do, or you have a tendency to anchor a little bit lower, you're going to gain or lose distance on your sight tape or your pins. Now moving along from that, the sight that I have on this bow right now that I just started playing with is a single pin sight. So aesthetically, I like the single pin because when you look at it right down, it's everything's centered. The pin is centered in the housing, and you know, when you center your peep sight on your housing, it's aesthetically perfectly centered. I like that for most of my tournament shooting and 3D shooting and that kind of stuff. I'm playing with this to maybe consider looking at doing a little different hunting setup, but when you look at the comparison, let me grab another bow. This is Braden's bow. When you look at the comparison here, and you see his bottom pin, which in his sight settings, his bottom pin correlates with his floater. Okay, so his bottom pin is maybe 1/8 of an inch or so off of that level, maybe a touch more than that, where this one's what, 5/8 of an inch off that level. So when you go again, look at a sight tape, and you start looking at how that correlates, a 1/2 inch worth of setting adjustment, you could be 20 to 25 yards. And this is an example tape here. Okay, this is an example tape off one of Bo's bows. But if you start looking at that and you say, okay, I want to achieve maximum long range sight settings for practice or what have you, that's where you need to be able to break down all the small components in the build. Now, again, going back to the sight, this is a setup that I personally don't like. When I use a 5-pin sight, my bottom pin ends up pretty similar, but I have a couple pins above it. But as far as looking at just my top pin center and then rolling down from there, I personally just, whether it's a mental thing, a mental block, whatever the case is, I don't like this type of setup for myself. I like this. If I'm going to shoot a 3-pin setup, then I'm going to have most likely one pin slightly above, one pin slightly below. So that way it's centered. And again, it's a preference. That's what you have to understand. A lot of these settings is about a preference on what you like, what will and it assists you in kind of having a calm mind, you know, when you're shooting. So the things that introduce anxiety, if somebody well, I'm not sure, Bo, what's the word I'm looking for? When somebody has like, it's not ADD, but it's when something's out of place and they got to fix it, right? OCD, thank you. All right, so little brain fart there on the camera, but when somebody has OCD, if they have a sight setting or a sight pin setup where it's towards the bottom or towards the top, then that might introduce a little bit of anxiety, and you may not think about it, but you get in a high pressure situation of hunting or a tournament could be, and then that could maybe not allow you to shoot a controlled shot like you want to be able to shoot. So that's kind of the progression. We're going to continue on with this topic of long-range shooting throughout the build, because there's other things that come into play that you can enhance your long-range shooting ability. Whether you're accurate or not, that's for you to determine and practice for. But as far as setting up your bow to allow for the longest sight settings as possible, there's a lot that goes into it, if that's your game. If that's not your game, not to worry about it. But nonetheless, it's a topic that came up as I'm going through this process, trying new things, going to try out some new sites and such, and new settings. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop this one here. We'll continue with this topic in another video, and I'll actually probably have Bo have one of his bows set up, and then one of mine, and we can actually showcase the arrow setting when we're measuring from the housing down, and how his is different than mine. And I actually have a half-inch longer draw than Bo, but he can get usually 10 to 15 yards further on his sight setting than I can on a maximum distance based off how I anchor. So like I said, all these little dominoes fall into place when you're putting your bow build together, and we're going to continue just to dive into it. So I hope you enjoyed this topic. We'll see you guys soon.